My name is Evelyn Hartwell, and at 48, I thought I had seen every shade of betrayal life could throw at me, until the day my own son became the knife in my back. The boy I had carried through sleepless nights, the boy I worked 2 jobs for just to keep food on the table after his father abandoned us, had inherited $12 million from a grandfather he barely knew. And in the same breath he signed the papers, he turned his back on me. It wasn't just rejection, it was exile. "I don't need you anymore, Mom," he had said, his voice cold, like he had rehearsed it 1,000 times in the mirror. He changed the locks on my house, moved me out of the only home I'd known for 20 years, and told the neighbors I was visiting family. No, I was discarded like trash. The humiliation burned more than the betrayal. The news spread like wildfire through our small Connecticut town. Friends I once trusted looked at me with pity, as though I had somehow failed as a mother. I had raised him alone, worked in a retirement home, scrubbed other people's floors, skipped meals to make sure he never went hungry. And for what? To be erased from his new polished life of luxury cars, designer suits, and fake friends who cheered him on for finally breaking free from me. But here's the part he never saw coming. 48 hours later, he came crawling back. His voice shook when he called, desperate, panicked, not the arrogant young man who had kicked me out but the little boy I once rocked to sleep. He said he needed me. No, he needed my signature. He couldn't move forward with his fortune without me. And in that moment, the power shifted. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the caller ID flashing his name, my hands trembling not from fear but from something darker, sharper. After everything he had done, he dared to ask me for help. He had no idea who he was dealing with anymore. Because the mother he betrayed had died the moment he slammed that door. The woman who picked up the phone now was someone else entirely. I pressed answer, my lips curling into a smile he couldn't see. "Hello, Aiden," I whispered, my voice calm, almost sweet. "I was wondering when you'd call." I wasn't born into wealth. I was born into struggle. By the time I was 19, I was already working 2 jobs, waitressing at night and scrubbing floors during the day. When Aiden's father, Gregory, left me for a younger woman, I was only 24, and Aiden was barely a toddler. People said I should put him in foster care or give him to my parents. But how could I? He was my whole world, the one thing that gave my life meaning when everything else felt like a curse. I promised myself I'd give him a life better than mine, even if it meant breaking my back. I remember winter nights when our heat was shut off. I'd pile every blanket we owned on top of him, shivering myself to sleep while he stayed warm. I skipped meals so he could eat. I pawned my jewelry, my wedding ring, even my grandmother's locket to pay rent. Each sacrifice carved lines into my soul, but it never felt like a burden, not when I'd see his tiny smile. I worked double shifts at the nursing home, cleaning bedpans, bathing old men who called me darling with shaking hands. My body ached, my spirit dimmed, but I kept pushing because Aiden deserved more. He deserved everything. School was my battlefield. Aiden was smart. Too smart for the tiny apartment we lived in. His teachers said he was gifted. They told me he needed tutors, programs, opportunities. I smiled, nodded, and then cried in the bathroom stall because I couldn't afford any of it. Still, I found a way. I took extra shifts, lied about being sick so I could work weekends, and bought him books at thrift shops. I stayed up late with him, studying algebra even though numbers had always terrified me. When he won his first spelling bee, he looked at me like I was a queen. That look was enough to keep me going. But then came the teenage years, the shift. Suddenly, the sneakers he wore weren't good enough. The car I drove embarrassed him. He wanted name brands. He wanted to fit in with kids whose parents had money. I told him we couldn't afford it, and the resentment in his eyes was like a dagger. He stopped introducing me at school events. He asked me to drop him off a block away so no one would see my rusty old Honda. I swallowed the hurt, reminding myself it was just a phase. Teenagers are cruel without meaning to. Or at least, that's what I told myself. College was both a blessing and a curse. He earned scholarships, and I worked myself half dead to cover the rest. When he got accepted to a prestigious school out of state, I thought he'd finally appreciate what I'd done for him. Instead, distance grew between us. He stopped answering my calls. Holidays were spent with friends, not with me. I sent care packages, handwritten notes, money I didn't have. Sometimes I wouldn't hear back for months. When I confronted him, he said I was being clingy, controlling. "I'm not your little boy anymore, Mom," he snapped. And for the first time, I realized I was losing him. Then came the whispers. His grandfather on Gregory's side, the man who had despised me from the start, was showering Aiden with attention. Invitations to dinners, introductions to wealthy business associates, expensive gifts. I warned Aiden that money comes with strings, but he wouldn't listen. He looked at his grandfather with admiration, the same way he used to look at me. It broke me in ways I can't explain. One night, after another unanswered call, I sat alone in the dark and admitted to myself what I had been denying for years. My son was slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull him back. The day the inheritance was announced, I wasn't even told. I heard it from a neighbor who read it in the paper. $12 million. My son had become a millionaire overnight. I called him, thinking surely he'd want to share the news with me, maybe even celebrate together. Instead, he answered with ice in his voice. "Don't call me, Mom. I don't need you anymore." I nearly dropped the phone. The boy I had carried, the man I had raised, cut me off like I was nothing but a burden. That moment killed the mother in me. But as I sat there in silence, broken, a seed of something new began to grow inside me. Not sorrow this time. Not heartbreak. Something sharper. Something stronger. The first time I saw Aiden on TV, it felt like a punch in the gut. There he was, standing beside his grandfather's old lawyer, wearing a suit worth more than my yearly salary, flashing that same smile that once melted my heart as a boy. Only now, it wasn't for me. It was for the cameras. He spoke about opportunity, about building a legacy, words I knew didn't belong to him but were fed to him by men with hungry eyes. My son had become a stranger in a tailored suit. And the cruelest part? He looked happy without me. I sat there in my tiny apartment, the walls closing in, the weight of betrayal sinking like a stone. He had the world at his feet, and I was no longer even a shadow in it. But money is a double-edged sword. At first, Aiden lived like a king. Expensive cars, a penthouse in Manhattan, designer clothes that still had the tags when he threw them out. I saw glimpses of it all online. His social media, full of smiling faces and champagne flutes. But I also saw the cracks if I looked closely enough. His eyes never matched his smile. His friends looked more interested in the bottle service than in him. It was all glitter, but no gold. I wanted to call him to warn him, to tell him that money could vanish faster than it appeared. But then I remembered his words. "Don't call me, Mom." So I didn't. I sat in silence and let him learn. I heard about his first business deal from a woman at church whose nephew was an intern at the firm. Aiden had invested millions into a startup that promised to revolutionize social media. I laughed bitterly when I heard it. He barely called me back in college, yet he thought he could change the way people connect? But what hit me hardest was knowing he hadn't called for advice, hadn't thought for a moment that his mother might have wisdom worth sharing. He was playing in a world of sharks, and he thought he was one of them. But I knew better. He wasn't a shark. He was bait. The invitations came next. Lavish parties, charity galas, exclusive clubs. Pictures of Aiden with women I'd never met, draped in diamonds and designer gowns, clinging to his arm like ivy on a wall. Every picture told the same story. He was surrounded, yet utterly alone. I wondered if he ever thought of me during those nights, if the music and the laughter drowned out the echo of the woman who once worked 3 jobs just to keep him fed. I doubted it. The boy I raised had buried me in the same grave he put his childhood. The man he was becoming had no room for me in his gilded world. Still, the cracks widened. Money makes you careless, and Aiden was no exception. His first investment failed spectacularly, the company folding within a year, millions lost overnight. I heard whispers that his grandfather's lawyer had warned him, but Aiden wouldn't listen. Pride had always been his weakness. Instead of slowing down, he doubled up, pouring more money into risky ventures, buying friends with trips to Europe, drowning doubts with expensive whiskey. I knew the signs too well. I'd seen men in the nursing home who once lived like kings, only to die broke and forgotten. I wondered if Aiden was headed down the same road. Then came the story that hit the tabloids. Young heir brawls in exclusive club. I stared at the headline, my coffee growing cold. The article described how Aiden had gotten into a drunken fight with another wealthy young man, both of them dragged out by security while cameras flashed. My heart sank. This wasn't the boy I raised. This was someone unrecognizable, reckless, arrogant, spiraling. I thought about calling him, just once, to remind him of the values I tried to teach him. But then I remembered his last words to me, the door he slammed shut. And so, I stayed silent. But silence doesn't stop the world from turning. Aiden's grandfather, the puppet master behind it all, passed away suddenly that winter. The papers called it a tragic loss for the community. I called it karma. Without the old man's shadow guiding him, Aiden was exposed, a boy playing king without his crown. And though I didn't know it yet, this was the moment his empire began to crumble. The sharks he thought were friends began circling tighter, the whispers grew louder, and the walls of his golden palace started closing in. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt something else. Something sharper. Because deep down, I knew the truth. His downfall wasn't just beginning. It was already here. The morning after the news of his grandfather's death, Aiden sat in his penthouse with unopened letters stacked on the marble counter and untouched champagne bottles gathering dust on the table. The city sparkled beneath him, but it was no longer a kingdom, it was a cage. Without the old man's influence, the calls became harsher, the smiles thinner, the friends scarcer. I saw it from the sidelines, piecing the story together through whispers in the community and headlines in the press. For the first time in years, I felt a shift in the air. My son, who once towered so high above me, was learning what it meant to fall. And though part of me ached for him, another part, the one buried by his cruelty, whispered that this was justice. He had cut me off without hesitation, and now the world was cutting him down in the same merciless fashion. At first, Aiden tried to keep up appearances. He threw a party the night of his grandfather's funeral, as though money could erase grief. Photographers captured the glittering scene. Models draped over couches, champagne towers crashing onto marble floors, laughter echoing through the penthouse. But behind the lights, the reality was darker. Bills piled high, creditors circled like vultures, and every business venture he touched seemed to wither in his hands. The failed social media startup was only the beginning. Soon, restaurants, real estate projects, and even a film production company drained his accounts like a leaking bucket. The same friends who toasted his wealth whispered behind his back that he was reckless, spoiled, doomed. I had warned him as a boy never to chase shadows, but he had never listened. Now he was drowning in them. The tabloids turned cruel. At first, they adored him, the golden heir with deep pockets and a playboy charm. But once the cracks showed, they ripped into him with claws. From heir to headache, one headline jeered. Young millionaire burns through fortune. Pictures of him stumbling drunk onto sidewalks, fights outside nightclubs, women crying as they stormed away from him filled the gossip columns. Every time I passed the newsstand outside the grocery store, his face stared back at me, swollen with pride and shame. The Evelyn from years ago might have called him, begged him to come home, to remember who he was. But the Evelyn sitting in a second-hand coat, with her hands cracked from scrubbing hospital floors, no longer had that instinct. He had made his bed in silk sheets. Now he could suffocate in them. But behind every headline, there was a truth I could still see. My son was breaking. His smile was brittle, his eyes glassy, his shoulders heavy with a weight he couldn't bear. Money had promised him freedom but delivered chains. And the loneliness, I could see it most in the loneliness. Those friends at the parties weren't friends at all. They were scavengers feeding on his last scraps of glory. One by one, they began disappearing, leaving him to foot the bills and the shame. The penthouse that once roared with music fell silent. I imagined him pacing those echoing halls, wondering when the tide would turn, too proud to admit it never would. And I imagined him thinking of me, the woman who once stayed up late to stitch his Halloween costumes, the one who would have forgiven anything. But forgiveness doesn't come cheap. Not anymore. The financial freefall accelerated faster than anyone expected. The lawyers who had once hovered like bodyguards began circling with demands. Lawsuits for unpaid debts, failed contracts, and broken agreements piled high. The millions his grandfather left were bleeding out in rivers, and Aiden had no idea how to dam them. He wasn't trained for hardship. His entire adult life had been gilded with safety nets, but now they had been ripped away. I wondered if he thought of me then, the mother who knew hardship better than anyone, the woman who could make a meal out of scraps, who could stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. But still, the phone stayed silent. His pride was a fortress, and I was locked outside of it, watching the fire consume him from within. Then came the whispers of addiction. Late-night deliveries of expensive liquor. Rumors of pills passed like candy at his gatherings. One morning, the papers published a photo of him collapsed on a velvet couch, shirt unbuttoned, glass still in his hand. The fall of Aidan Burke, the caption read, cruel and gleeful. My chest tightened when I saw it. Not because I didn't expect it, but because, deep down, I still saw the boy who once fell asleep in the back seat of my car after Little League, clutching his glove like a treasure. He had become a man unrecognizable, yet somehow I still knew him. I still loved him, though that love was buried under anger and betrayal so thick it could choke me. Love, after all, doesn't vanish, it festers. As weeks turned into months, the spiral worsened. His penthouse was sold to cover debts, his cars repossessed, his name dragged through the mud. Those who once fought for a seat at his table now avoided his calls. He became a ghost in the city he once ruled, walking streets where no one remembered his glory, only his disgrace. I heard rumors he had retreated to a small apartment in Queens, stripped of his kingdom. For the first time in years, I thought about seeing him face to face. But not as his savior. No, if fate put him before me again, it would not be for comfort. It would be for confrontation. He needed to understand what it meant to burn a bridge with the only person who would have carried him across the river. And then, the unexpected happened. A letter arrived at my door, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My hands trembled as I held it. The ink smudged as though written in haste. Inside was only one line. I need you. No explanation, no apology. Just 3 words from the son who had banished me from his life. My heart raced with anger and something else. Something dangerously close to hope. But I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and left it unopened on the counter. If he wanted my help, he would have to do more than scrawl 3 desperate words. He would have to face me, look me in the eyes, and remember who I was. Until then, the letter would remain a ghost between us. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. My son's empire had crumbled, but the true test was yet to come. And this time, the battlefield would not be boardrooms or nightclubs. It would be between us, mother and son, blood-bound by betrayal, standing on opposite sides of a line neither of us was willing to cross. I'll never forget the knock on my door. It was timid, almost fragile, the sound of someone who no longer carried the arrogance of youth or the weight of millions. For a moment, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe a delivery. But when I opened the door, time itself seemed to stop. Aidan stood there, or rather, what was left of him. His once polished hair was unkempt, his jaw dark with stubble. The sharp suits had been traded for a wrinkled jacket that smelled faintly of whiskey and rain. His eyes, the same eyes that once lit up when I clapped for him at his school plays, were dull, bloodshot, desperate. For years, I had imagined this moment, rehearsed what I would say if he ever came crawling back. I thought I'd scream, slam the door, unleash years of hurt in one brutal strike. But as I looked at him, I could barely breathe. All I managed to whisper was, "What do you want, Aidan?" He swallowed hard, shifting on the porch like a boy waiting for permission to come inside. "Mom, I don't have anywhere else to go," he said, his voice cracking with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. Gone was the entitled tone, the smug arrogance, the man who once laughed at me when I begged him for kindness. In his place was someone raw, hollowed out, stripped bare by life's cruelty. I wanted to feel pity, to open my arms and tell him he was safe. But another part of me remembered the night he told me I was dead to him, the night he cut me off without hesitation. I stood my ground, my hand gripping the edge of the door. "You made your choice, Aidan," I said coldly. His eyes widened. Brimming with tears he tried to hold back. "I know. But please, just hear me out." My silence stretched between us, heavy and unforgiving. Finally, I stepped aside and let him in, though not out of mercy. I wanted to see him crumble in the house he once abandoned. He walked into the living room like a ghost, his gaze darting across the familiar walls, the same pictures that had watched him grow. There he was in his graduation cap, grinning with the world at his feet. There he was as a boy in my arms, laughing as though joy would never end. His eyes lingered on those photographs, and for a moment, I saw shame ripple across his face. He sank into the couch, the same couch where he once sprawled out, demanding snacks while I rushed between jobs to keep food on the table. But now he looked small, shrunken, as though the cushions themselves were swallowing him whole. He ran a hand through his messy hair and exhaled shakily. Everything's gone, Mom. The money, the cars, the penthouse, gone. I thought I could handle it. Thought I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong. I need you. His words hung in the air like a confession. I sat across from him, studying the broken man my son had become. Anger simmered beneath my calm exterior. Did he think he could just waltz back into my life with a few pitiful words and wipe away years of betrayal? My heart throbbed with conflicting emotions. Love, rage, sorrow, and something darker I dared not name. Why now? I asked sharply. Why only when you've lost everything? He lowered his gaze, fumbling with his hands like a child caught in a lie. Because I was blind, he admitted. I thought money made me untouchable, but it destroyed me. Everyone I trusted left. The only person I should have held on to, the only one who ever really cared, I threw away. His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw sincerity. But sincerity wasn't enough. Sincerity didn't heal the years I spent alone, working myself into exhaustion while he lived like a king. Words are cheap, Aiden, I said coldly. And you've had a lifetime to learn that. His shoulders slumped, and tears spilled down his cheeks. I'll do anything to prove it. Just don't shut me out again. I wish I could say his tears melted me, that my mother's heart rose above the wounds. But pain has a memory sharper than glass. I thought of the winter nights I went without heat because every cent went to his education. I thought of the birthdays spent alone, waiting for a call that never came. I thought of the way he sneered at me when I begged him not to throw me aside after his inheritance. How he looked me in the eyes and said I was nothing. And now here he was, crumbling in my living room, begging for the same forgiveness he once denied me. My chest ached, but my voice stayed steel. You don't get to rewrite the past, Aiden. Actions have consequences. And you've barely scratched the surface of yours. His lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought he'd bolt from the house. But instead, he whispered, Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to make it right. I leaned forward, staring into his broken eyes, feeling the power shift between us. For years, he had towered over me with wealth and arrogance, and now, here he sat, stripped of everything but need. You want to make it right? I said softly, my tone laced with both promise and threat. Then you'll listen. You'll do as I say. You'll learn what it means to earn trust instead of buying it. You'll learn humility, Aiden, the same way I learned it when I had nothing. His breath hitched as though the words stung deeper than any slap. But he nodded, slowly, like a man submitting to judgment. In that moment, I realized this was no longer just about forgiveness. This was about power. For the first time in years, I held it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to let it go. The game had shifted. And this time, I was the one setting the rules. I woke the next morning with a strange heaviness in my chest. For years, I had begged God for this very moment. My son needing me, stripped of pride. Yet now that it had come, I couldn't shake the storm inside me. I made coffee, sat by the window, and listened to the silence of the house that had once felt so empty. Aiden was still asleep on the couch, curled beneath the same quilt I'd patched countless times when money was tight. He looked nothing like the proud man who had thrown me away. In that fragile quiet, I realized I had a choice. I could forgive him instantly, or I could finally show him what it meant to be left with nothing. Forgiveness would have been easier, but easy had cost me years of pain. So I decided, if Aiden wanted back into my life, he'd have to earn every inch of ground he once burned to ash. When Aiden woke, the air was tense, like the calm before a storm. He rubbed his eyes, embarrassed to be caught vulnerable in my home. Thanks for letting me stay, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. I sipped my coffee, studying him as though I were staring at a stranger. You're not staying, I said flatly. His head snapped up, fear flashing in his eyes. What do you mean? He asked. I set down my cup slowly, savoring the control. You'll work for it. You'll prove yourself. You've lived like a king off money you didn't earn, while I scraped my hands raw trying to build a life for you. So now, you're going to learn what it feels like to start from nothing. If you want food, if you want shelter, if you want even a shred of trust, you'll work. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, shame painting his face. Work where? He whispered. I leaned back, letting the silence sting. Anywhere. But you'll start small, just like the rest of us did. The first place I sent him was Mr. Donnelly's hardware store down the street. It wasn't glamorous, and that was the point. For years, Aiden's hands had known only luxury. Steering leather-wrapped wheels, scrolling through bank apps swollen with inheritance money, holding glasses of champagne at parties I wasn't invited to. But here, those same hands would carry lumber, stock shelves, and sweep dusty floors. I walked him there myself, the way I had walked him to school when he was a boy. Mr. Donnelly, a grizzled Vietnam vet with a sharp tongue, raised an eyebrow when I asked if he had space for an extra pair of hands. He looked Aiden up and down, taking in the worn-out jacket and defeated posture. "He any good with a broom?" Donnelly asked dryly. Aiden's cheeks flushed, but he nodded. "I'll do whatever you need." The words were small, humbled, but I could feel his pride swallowing them like poison. That was my first victory. Watching him trade pride for survival. Day after day, I watched him trudge back from the hardware store, sweat staining his shirt, his body aching from the labor. For the first time, he was living like the rest of us, like the people he'd once looked down upon. I never coddled him. I never said, "I'm proud of you." That was too easy too soon. Instead, I gave him silence, forcing him to sit with the weight of humility. He tried to bridge the gap between us. Small talks about work, little apologies slipped into conversation, but I refused to let him off the hook. My silence was punishment. My distance the mirror of the abandonment he once gave me. And yet, in the cracks of his exhaustion, I saw something shift. He no longer carried himself with arrogance. He began to say, "Thank you" when I made dinner, began to fold his quilt neatly in the morning. Little by little, the cracks of his old self gave way to someone I barely recognized. Still, I knew pain alone wasn't enough. Pain humbles, but it doesn't heal. He needed to confront what he had done, to feel the sting of betrayal from the other side. So one evening, I set down my fork at dinner and looked him in the eye. "Tell me, Aiden," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "what did it feel like to cut me off?" His fork froze mid-air, his shoulders stiffening. He swallowed, his voice shaky. At the time it felt powerful. Like I was finally in control. Like I didn't owe anyone anything. His eyes dropped, shame darkening his face. But the truth? It was empty. I thought I was freeing myself, but really, I was destroying the only person who ever loved me. His words hit me like a stone to the chest. 4 years, I had waited for that admission, dreamed of it. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Good," I said simply. "Now you know what it feels like to be on the other side." His lips quivered, but he nodded, silent. Weeks passed, and Aiden grew thinner, his hands calloused, his pride stripped layer by layer. But with every passing day, the boy I had raised began to emerge. The boy who once hugged me tight before school, the boy who used to write me cards that said, "You're the best mom." Sometimes, I caught him staring at those old photographs on the wall, his eyes lingering on memories he could never buy back. And though I didn't show it, my heart began to ache with something dangerous. Hope. Could I trust him again? Could he truly change? Or was this just another mask? Another manipulation? The questions haunted me at night, but one truth remained. I was no longer powerless. For the first time in years, he was learning the lessons I had carried all my life. That love is not a given, trust is not free, and family is built not with money, but with sacrifice. And if he wanted redemption, he had to bleed for it. It was one thing for Aiden to sweep floors at a hardware store, to feel the ache of labor in his back and the sting of calluses on his hands. That was surface work, humility for the body. But true humility, the kind that broke through the walls he had built around his heart, required something much deeper. It required facing the ghosts of his choices. That's when I decided his next trial would not come from me, but from the family he had burned along the way. It had been almost 2 years since he had last spoken to his Aunt Marjorie. She had been the one who lent him money before the inheritance came, the one who helped him through his college years when tuition threatened to swallow us whole. And when the millions arrived, she became invisible to him, discarded like an old receipt. I called her on a Tuesday evening. She answered with suspicion, her voice sharp as glass. "Evelyn? After all this time, why now?" I swallowed my pride. "Because he needs to see you. He needs to remember who he hurt." There was a long pause, then a sigh heavy with years of bitterness. "Then bring him. But don't expect me to go easy." When I told Aiden, he stiffened, his fork clattering against the plate. "Marjorie?" he repeated, his voice cracking. She hates me." I met his eyes, letting my silence speak for me. "Exactly," I said, my tone even. "And you need to face that." The drive to Marjorie's house was heavy with silence, the kind that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I could see the panic written all over Aiden's face as we pulled into her gravel driveway. Marjorie lived in a modest farmhouse just outside of town, her porch light glowing against the dusk. The door opened before we even reached it. She stood there with arms crossed, her silver hair tied in a bun, her eyes narrowing at the sight of him. "So," she said coldly, "the prince has fallen." Aiden froze, guilt coloring his cheeks. I gave him a subtle nod, urging him forward. He took a step, then another, his voice small and broken. "Aunt Marjorie, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. She didn't flinch. "Sorry doesn't pay back 2 years of silence," she snapped. "Sorry doesn't undo the day you cut off your own mother." Aiden's lips trembled, and I watched the weight of her words press him lower, like stones stacked on his chest. Inside, Marjorie's home smelled of old wood and cinnamon, the same as it always had. I remembered holidays here, when laughter filled these walls and Aiden used to play board games with his cousins by the fire. But tonight, the air was sharp, charged with resentment. She led us into the kitchen and sat us down at her scarred oak table. "Talk," she ordered. Aiden sat hunched, staring at his hands. "I thought money would fix everything," he admitted. "I thought, if I didn't need anyone, no one could hurt me. But I was wrong." Marjorie leaned forward, her eyes piercing. "Do you know what you did to your mother? To this family? We carried you. And when it was your turn to carry us, you vanished." His shoulders shook, his voice breaking. "I know. And I hate myself for it every day." The confession spilled from him, raw and unpolished. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who once clung to my hand when the world seemed too big. Marjorie's face softened, but only slightly. "Words are cheap," she said. "You want forgiveness? Earn it. Show it. Prove it." The evening stretched long, filled with silences and broken confessions. Aiden spoke about the nights he spent alone in his mansion, the hollowness of the wealth that replaced family. He admitted how he had thrown parties with strangers while the people who loved him most went ignored. Tears slid down his face, but Marjorie didn't offer comfort. She simply let him bleed his soul dry, the way he had once bled others with his arrogance. By the time we left, Aiden looked like a man stripped to his bones. In the car, he stared out the window, silent. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't realize how much I hurt her." I turned the wheel, my voice quiet but firm. "And that's just one person, Aiden. There are more. Your cousins, your grandfather. You turned away from all of them. If you want me to believe you've changed, you'll have to face them all." His head snapped toward me, eyes wide with fear. "All of them?" I nodded. "One by one. Every bridge you burned, you'll rebuild." The following weeks became a pilgrimage of reckoning. I took him to his grandfather's nursing home, where the old man sat hunched in a wheelchair, his hands trembling but his eyes still sharp with disappointment. Aiden knelt before him, tears dripping onto the tiled floor as he begged for forgiveness. I took him to his cousin's modest apartments, where children he'd never met clung to their parents while glaring at him with suspicion. Each visit was a trial, each conversation a mirror held to his shame. And I watched, silently, as each encounter stripped away the armor he had built around himself. He began to speak less of himself and more of others. He began to listen. And though my heart softened with every step he took toward humility, I reminded myself daily. Change must be proven, not promised. By the end of the month, Aiden was no longer the same man who had arrived on my couch, desperate and broken. His eyes no longer carried arrogance but carried something heavier, accountability. One night, after a particularly difficult visit with his grandfather, he sat at my kitchen table, his head in his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice raw, "I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from you. Not from anyone." My chest ached, but I kept my voice steady. "Maybe not. But redemption isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. You can't undo the past. But you can decide what kind of man you'll be from this day forward." He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red and swollen. Then I want to be a better man, he whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed him. Still, belief wasn't enough. There was one final test waiting. One that would decide if his transformation was real, or just another mask. I knew that if I kept dragging Aiden through the same cycle of apologies, it would eventually lose its meaning. Sorry could be said 1,000 times, and still never change a man's heart. True transformation required a choice, one so sharp and clear that it carved a new path. That's when I realized what his final test had to be. A decision between clinging to wealth or choosing family. It would need to be brutal, undeniable, a crossroads he couldn't escape. I spent days thinking, lying awake at night replaying the ways he had wounded us, the money he had wasted, and the years he had stolen from me with his silence. Then one morning, as I looked over my late husband's pension papers and the modest savings I had built from decades of careful work, the plan struck me with terrifying clarity. I called a lawyer. I need you to draft a document, I told him. Something that will force my son to reveal who he truly is. When the day came, I invited Aiden to sit across from me at the same kitchen table where I had raised him. The same table where he once ate cereal with cartoons flickering in the background. Now it would be the place of judgment. I slid a folder across the wood, my hands trembling only slightly. Inside this, I said, is a choice. One signature will give you access to the remainder of your father's trust fund. Money you've never touched. Enough to restart your life, to climb back into the comfort you once knew. The other signature gives that money away entirely. It will go into a foundation your father and I dreamed of creating, one that would help single mothers, widows, and struggling families. If you choose the money, you walk away rich again. If you choose the foundation, you walk away with nothing but your dignity, and my trust. His face drained of color. His hands hovered over the folder like it was a weapon. For the first time since his inheritance crumbled, I saw panic in his eyes. Not from losing, but from having to decide. Mom, you can't do this, he whispered, his voice breaking. This isn't fair. I leaned forward, my gaze sharp as glass. Life hasn't been fair to me either, Aiden. Life wasn't fair when your father died and left me to raise you alone. Life wasn't fair when I worked double shifts while you dreamed of bigger things. But I didn't ask life to be fair. I asked it to give me strength. And it did. Now I'm asking the same of you. He stared at the folder like it held his soul inside. If I take the money, he said slowly, you'll never forgive me. I let the silence confirm his fear. And if I don't take it, he whispered, his voice barely audible, I'll be starting from nothing again. I folded my arms. Then you'll know what kind of man you truly are. The minutes ticked by like hours, the air so thick I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Aiden rubbed his temples, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what you're asking of me? He shouted suddenly, his voice raw. I've lived broke. I've lived desperate. I know what that feels like. And you want me to throw away a second chance. His voice cracked, and the anger melted into something far more vulnerable. But if I take the money, I lose you. I lose everything that actually matters. His words trembled, and I could see the battle tearing him apart inside. The boy who still craved love and the man who once worshipped wealth colliding like two storms. I stayed silent, because silence was the only weapon left. Silence would not let him wriggle free. He dropped back into the chair, his chest heaving. Tell me what to do, Mom, he pleaded, tears streaking down his face. But I didn't. I couldn't. This had to be his choice, not mine. He opened the folder at last, his fingers trembling as he stared at the two documents. One promising instant salvation, the other demanding sacrifice. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. He hovered over the first line, his lips whispering words I couldn't hear. I saw the child in him, the desperate little boy who once held my hand in a grocery store because he was afraid of getting lost. And I saw the man who had betrayed me, who had cut me off with the arrogance of a king sitting on stolen gold. Which side would win? His tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. He pressed the pen down, and my heart stopped. This was the moment that would define us both. The moment that would decide if all my lessons, all my pain, had built something real inside him, or if greed still owned him entirely. The pen scratched against the paper, slow and deliberate. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe, terrified that even the sound of air might sway him. When he finally set the pen down, he pushed the folder back toward me, his eyes red and hollow. It's done, he said simply. My hands trembled as I pulled it toward me, but I didn't look inside yet. Instead, I studied his face. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't gloating. He was broken, exhausted, and, somewhere deep down, hopeful. "Whatever you see in there," he whispered, "just know. I made the choice I thought you'd respect." My chest burned, torn between the fear of betrayal and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he had chosen something greater than himself. I rested my hand on the folder, closing my eyes for a moment before I opened it. The world seemed to hold its breath with me. The folder sat before me like a loaded gun. My fingers twitched above it, sweating, trembling, refusing to obey the command to either open or walk away. It wasn't just paper. It was judgment. It was my mother's eyes boring into me, her silence louder than any scream. Her years of sacrifice laid bare in two neat stacks of legal jargon. One choice offered salvation. Money, security, the life I had lost and hungered for. The other offered nothing but honor, a word I hadn't lived by in years. I could feel her watching, her breath steady, her body still. She wouldn't help me. She wouldn't tell me the answer. And yet, I knew she already had an answer in her heart. The question was, would I be man enough to give it to her? Or would I once again prove that I was nothing but a coward who sold his blood for silver? Memories poured in uninvited, slicing through me like glass. I remembered my first car, the one she scraped 3 years of savings together to buy because she didn't want me riding a rusty bike at 17. I remembered the smell of grilled cheese at midnight when I stumbled home drunk, pretending I had everything under control while she pretended not to see through the lies. I remembered my father's funeral, the rain soaking our coats, her hand gripping mine as if she could hold us both together with nothing but skin and bone. Those moments screamed louder than the promises of dollar signs. And yet, greed slithered in just as quick. I remembered the feel of silk sheets, the thrill of my friend's envy when I bought rounds of drinks without checking the price. I remembered the arrogance of walking into dealerships and pointing at cars, not asking about mileage, not asking about cost. Power was addictive, and the idea of never having it again left me clawing at my chest. The pen in my hand felt heavier than iron. I turned it between my fingers, staring at the page like it might strike me dead. I thought about the foundation. Single mothers, widows, struggling families. People like Mom. People like us. I could give them hope. But then the devil's voice whispered, "Why should strangers benefit from what's rightfully yours? Why should you be noble while others live easy?" The voice of greed was slick, convincing, wrapping me in chains I thought I had already broken. My chest tightened. I glanced at Mom. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She was steel, waiting to see if I would break. I wanted to scream at her, to beg her to tell me what to do. But then I realized that was the test. That had always been the test. To stand as a man without leaning on her shoulders anymore. To choose for myself. Tears welled in my eyes as another memory struck me like a fist. The day I told her I didn't need her anymore. I had just turned 21, drunk on inheritance and arrogance, spitting venom I didn't mean. I saw her face that day, the way her lips tightened, the way her shoulders sagged but her chin stayed high. I cut her out of my life because I thought money made me untouchable. And now, here I was, begging silently for her approval, desperate for her forgiveness. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Could I undo it all with one choice? Could I make her proud again, or had I already destroyed every chance? The pen trembled in my grip. My pulse thundered in my ears. I pressed the tip down, hovering above the first signature line, paralyzed by the weight of everything that had led us here. My hand shook harder the longer I stared. I wanted to run. I wanted to rip the papers up and escape the trap. But running had gotten me here. Running had left me broke, abandoned, empty. I thought of the friends who vanished the moment my accounts ran dry. I thought of the girl who swore she loved me, then left for someone with more to offer. I thought of every door slammed in my face when I begged for help. And through it all, one person remained, Mom. The same woman I had cut out, cursed, disrespected, and shamed. She still opened her door to me, still gave me this chance, still looked at me not with hate, but with something scarier, hope. I realized in that moment that she hadn't given me a test of money. She had given me a test of love. Could I choose her, or would I choose myself again? Finally, I pressed the pen down to the page, my heart screaming, my soul tearing in two. Every ounce of me burned with fear. Fear of losing her forever, fear of walking away with nothing, fear of choosing wrong. The ink bled onto the line, curving into the shape of letters, spelling out a decision that would haunt or redeem me forever. My hand was steady now, almost too steady, like something inside me had already decided long before my mind caught up. I finished the signature, dropped the pen, and pushed the folder back across the table. My throat was dry, my chest hollow, my face wet with tears. "It's done," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. Mom reached for the folder slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. And in that silent moment, with the paper between us like a battlefield, I realized the truth. Whether she forgave me or not, my life would never be the same. Evelyn's hands hovered over the folder as though it were alive, as though opening it might summon every ghost of their past. Her fingers shook, not from age but from fear. Fear of what this moment would carve into stone. For all the strength she had shown, she was still a mother, and a mother's heart is a fragile thing. Aiden's eyes were locked on her, glistening, swollen from the tears he fought to suppress, but strangely steady, as if some part of him had finally found peace and surrender. The silence was unbearable, thick, and suffocating. Finally, Evelyn slid the folder open, her breath caught in her throat as she pulled the crisp stack of legal pages into view. She saw it there, ink black and bold, his name scrawled with a steadiness that betrayed the storm he had just walked through. He had signed. But as her eyes scanned further, her heart jolted, because he hadn't signed the way she, or anyone, had expected. On the page was his signature, yes, but beside it, in the margins, in his own jagged handwriting, he had scrawled something that wasn't part of the contract. A single line that read, "For her, not me." Evelyn's breath trembled. He hadn't signed to claim his share, nor had he signed to leave it untouched. He had amended it, redirecting his portion entirely, every cent of it, into her foundation. Not half. Not a symbolic gesture. All of it. His signature was not for ownership but for surrender, a willful transfer of wealth that severed him from fortune permanently. It was both redemption and punishment, an act so selfless it nearly broke her. Her chest ached, because she knew what it cost him. To give up everything, to cut off even the possibility of future greed. This was his sacrifice. For her. For once in his life, her son had chosen love over money, even if it meant stripping himself bare. Tears stung Evelyn's eyes, but they were not tears of joy alone. They carried grief too. She looked up at Aiden, her lips parting, but no words came. He was staring at her, waiting, bracing for judgment like a child who had finally learned how to apologize. His shoulders slumped, his face wet, and for the first time since he was a boy, he looked small, fragile. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered, voice breaking. "I don't deserve another chance. But I couldn't take it from you. Not again. I don't know who I am without the money, but maybe I can figure it out if you'll let me stay close." Evelyn's chest clenched so tight she thought she might collapse. She had dreamed of this moment, of her son seeing beyond himself, but it came wrapped in thorns. How could she celebrate when he had chosen a path that left him empty-handed, vulnerable, stripped of everything? And yet, how could she not celebrate the son who had finally found humility? For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Her silence stretched between them like an abyss, but in truth, she wasn't silent at all. She was screaming inside. She remembered the little boy clutching her hand at the zoo, afraid of the lions. She remembered the teenager who stormed out the door shouting that he never needed her. She remembered the man who looked her in the eye and disowned her for money. And now, here he was, full circle, laying his pride at her feet, begging silently for one last chance. She wanted to rush forward and hold him, to tell him it was enough, that love was enough. But Evelyn was not just his mother. She was the gatekeeper of something bigger now. The foundation wasn't just money. It was legacy. And if she let him back into her heart too easily, would he fall again? Would she? The weight of her choice pressed on her chest like iron. Aiden wiped at his face, his voice cracking with the rawness of a man stripped of armor. "Mom, I can't undo the years. I can't take back the words I said. But I can choose now. I don't want to be that man anymore. I don't want to be owned by money, or by my pride. I gave it all up because it poisoned me. But if you shut me out now, if you shut me out forever, then I don't know who I'll become. I'm scared, Mom. For the first time in my life, I'm terrified. Not of being broke. Not of being nobody. I'm scared of losing you." His words splintered her heart. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. She closed the folder gently, pressing her palm against it as if sealing his decision inside. Then she looked at her son, not the spoiled man who once betrayed her, but the broken boy who finally understood the price of love, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe he could change. But before Evelyn could speak, before she could give him the words that would either save or shatter him, the sharp trill of the phone shattered the silence. The sound sliced through the fragile moment like a blade, jolting them both. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the phone on the counter, its screen flashing with an unknown number. Aiden's shoulders stiffened, fear flashing in his eyes, as though the universe itself was conspiring to rip this fragile truce apart. Evelyn hesitated. The folder was still under her hand, the words for her, not me, burning into her mind like fire. She knew whatever came next would not wait, that the world had a cruel way of demanding choices at the worst possible moments. Slowly, she rose, her eyes still locked on Aiden, and reached for the phone. The moment she answered, she knew. Their story wasn't done. This signature was only the beginning, and the past had more shadows yet to cast. The phone buzzed again, sharp and insistent, as Evelyn pressed it to her ear. "Hello." Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. On the other end came a clipped, professional tone. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is David Brooks from First National. I need to inform you of something urgent regarding the Foundation's accounts." Evelyn's spine stiffened. "What about them?" she asked, clutching the folder tighter against her chest as if shielding it from unseen hands. A pause. Then, words that drained the warmth from the room. "There's been unauthorized activity. Large sums have been flagged. Transfers initiated under your name. Millions. Mrs. Whitaker. If we don't act fast, it could all be gone by morning." Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment, the world tilted beneath her feet. She glanced at Aiden, his face tightening with dread. He mouthed, "What is it?" But her voice wouldn't move past the lump in her throat. All she could think was, who would dare? Who had the access, the audacity, to try and steal her legacy? When she finally managed to speak, Evelyn's voice was cold steel. "Freeze everything immediately. No transfers, no withdrawals, not a cent." David's voice lowered, troubled. "That's the problem. The requests came from someone with full authorization. Documents signed. Codes matched. We believe this was an inside job, Mrs. Whitaker." Evelyn's blood ran cold. An inside job. Betrayal not from strangers but from those she trusted most. She had built the Foundation with a small circle of advisors, lawyers, and accountants. People she had chosen for their loyalty. Could one of them have turned? Her grip on the phone trembled. "I'll be there in an hour," she snapped before ending the call. Aiden stepped forward, eyes wide. "What happened?" Evelyn stared at him, her chest rising and falling with fury and disbelief. "Someone is stealing from us," she said. Her words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on both of them. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't see Aiden as the threat. He wasn't the wolf at her door anymore. No, the wolves had already made it inside. The drive to the bank was a blur of headlights and silence. Aiden sat beside her, hands gripping his knees, his jaw clenched. Evelyn's thoughts spiraled as the city lights streaked past. The betrayal stung deeper than she wanted to admit. Money was money. But this wasn't just cash. This was her life's work, her late husband's legacy, her answer to every child who needed a chance she had once been denied. Losing it wasn't just financial ruin. It was the death of her purpose. When they arrived, the bank's glass towers loomed above them, sterile and cold, a fortress of wealth where loyalty could be bought and sold. Inside, they were escorted to a private conference room where David Brooks, a gray-haired man in a pressed suit, slid a stack of papers across the table. Evelyn scanned them quickly, her heart sinking. The forged signatures were hers, her name in ink, her codes authentic. But she had never touched these documents. Someone with intimate knowledge of her security had replicated her perfectly. Aiden leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Who had access to this?" he asked sharply. David adjusted his glasses. "Your senior accountant, your legal advisor, and your executive assistant." Evelyn froze. Her assistant. A woman she had trusted like family. The memory of Lydia Hartman's smile flashed in Evelyn's mind. Lydia had been at her side for over a decade, organizing meetings, handling correspondence, even helping her choose flowers for her late husband's funeral. Evelyn had trusted her with everything. Banking codes, signatures, confidential files. The thought that Lydia might betray her was unthinkable, yet the evidence lay bare before her. Aiden noticed the way his mother's face paled, and his voice hardened. "It's her, isn't it? You're thinking of Lydia." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting the storm of emotion building inside. "She knew everything," she whispered. "Every code, every password. She even had copies of my signature for signing off on smaller checks." Aiden slammed his palm against the table, startling David. "Then she's the one. And she's not doing this alone. No way. Someone's feeding her." Evelyn reached out, placing a trembling hand over her son's. "Aiden, this could destroy us. If the foundation collapses, if the press gets wind of this, everything we've built will be dust." For a fleeting second, she felt the strange comfort of his hand beneath hers, steady and strong. Once, she had feared his hunger for power. Now, she realized, she needed his fire more than ever. For the first time, they were not enemies but reluctant allies bound by the same wound. "Then we fight," Aiden said firmly, his voice carrying a conviction Evelyn hadn't heard in years. "But we don't go through lawyers and courts. Not yet. If Lydia is behind this, she's too smart to leave an easy trail. We'll need to catch her ourselves." Evelyn studied him, her chest tight with a mix of fear and pride. Was this the son she had prayed for? The one who would stand beside her instead of across from her? She nodded slowly. "We do this quietly. If word gets out, donors will flee, and the children depending on us will pay the price." David Brooks frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitaker, this could be dangerous." Evelyn cut him off with a sharp look. "Dangerous is watching thieves dismantle everything we stand for. Dangerous is doing nothing." She rose to her feet, her eyes blazing. "We find her. We stop her. Whatever it takes." Aiden stood too, squaring his shoulders beside hers. For the first time in a long while, they looked like a team. As they stepped back into the night, the city air heavy with tension, Evelyn felt the strange thrum of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Beside her, Aiden matched her stride, his face grim but resolute. This wasn't the son who once abandoned her for money. This was a man ready to fight for something greater, even if it meant confronting betrayal head-on. Still, Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. If Lydia truly was behind the theft, she wouldn't go down quietly. She had years of knowledge, connections, and perhaps allies waiting in the shadows. Evelyn tightened her grip on the folder she still carried, the one with Aiden's sacrifice scrawled in ink. "For her, not me." Those words burned like a promise in her mind. Perhaps Aiden had already proven himself more than she realized. Perhaps his redemption would come not from signing papers but from standing beside her in the war that was about to begin. And as the night swallowed them whole, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this fight for the foundation wasn't just about saving money. It was about saving themselves. The next morning, Evelyn sat in her study with her old leather-bound planner open, pages filled with notes and scribbles from years of running the foundation. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping her desk in uneven bands of gold, but there was no warmth in it today. Aiden sat across from her, leaning forward, eyes fixed on the stacks of files she had pulled from the archives. "If Lydia's the one moving money," Evelyn said, tapping her pen against the desk, "then she's been planning this for a while. We'll need to look for patterns, small discrepancies, hidden withdrawals, anything that doesn't line up." Aiden nodded, already leafing through a binder of invoices. He had traded his tailored blazer for a plain gray hoodie, but his intensity hadn't softened. Evelyn watched him silently for a moment, marveling at the way his sharp mind cut through the documents with ease. For once, she wasn't afraid of his ambition. She needed it. They spent hours combing through records, receipts, and transaction logs, the quiet only broken by the occasional rustle of paper or Evelyn's pen scratching notes. Every so often, Aiden muttered under his breath. Dates, amounts, company names. He circled one entry, then another. "Here," he said finally, sliding a file toward Evelyn. "This vendor, Harper Consulting. You ever heard of them?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. We've never hired an outside consultant. That's not our practice." Aiden's lips curved into a grim line. "Then why are there payments to them every quarter for the last 3 years? Small ones at first. 10, 20,000. Then, after Dad passed, They ballooned to hundreds of thousands. And here, he flipped to the most recent entry. Last month, 1.5 million. Evelyn's stomach turned. She knew what that meant. It's a shell, she whispered. A fake company. Someone funneled the money there, step by step, until it looked legitimate. Aiden met her eyes, his voice low and certain, and Lydia was the one cutting the checks. The realization hit Evelyn like a blow. She thought of every moment Lydia had smiled patiently at her side, every time she had said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Whitaker, I'll take care of it." How many times had Evelyn been blind to the betrayal happening right under her nose? Her throat tightened with shame and anger, but before she could speak, Aiden leaned forward. "There's more," he said, his voice taut with urgency. "Look at the timing. The transfers spiked right after I inherited. It's almost like she wanted to make it look like I was the one bleeding the foundation dry." Evelyn's breath caught. Could it be true? Had Lydia not only stolen from her, but also tried to pit her against her son? Suddenly, the fights, the accusations, the mistrust between her and Aiden, it all shimmered in a new horrifying light. Evelyn pressed her palms against the desk, her voice trembling. "She tried to turn me against you." Aiden's jaw flexed. "And she almost succeeded." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She paced her room, staring out at the quiet suburban street where porch lights glowed faintly in the distance. Betrayal was a wound that cut deeper than loss. She thought of her late husband, of the promises they had made to build something enduring, and how blind she had been to the rot growing inside their walls. Somewhere in the silence, Aiden's voice echoed in her mind. She almost succeeded. It struck her then that Lydia's betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about family. By poisoning the bond between mother and son, Lydia had ensured Evelyn would never look too closely at her work. Evelyn sat down on the edge of her bed, running her hands through her hair. For the first time, she admitted to herself how much she had missed Aiden. His laughter when he was young, his fierce debates as a teenager, even his reckless ambition. She had let Lydia's shadow stand between them, and now, both her foundation and her family teetered on the brink of collapse. The following morning, Evelyn and Aiden drove across town to a quiet coffee shop instead of meeting at the foundation. They needed neutral ground, somewhere away from Lydia's watchful eyes. Aiden pulled out his laptop, connecting to the bank's secure records, while Evelyn kept watch over the door. The barista, a young woman with curly hair and tired eyes, passed them 2 mugs without a word. Evelyn gripped hers tightly, letting the steam curl into her face. "What's our next move?" she asked. Aiden's fingers flew across the keyboard. "We build a trail. We trace Harper Consulting to whoever owns it. If Lydia's behind it, we'll find her fingerprints. But if she's working with someone else..." He didn't finish, but Evelyn felt the chill settle in her chest. Someone else. The thought of a wider conspiracy gnawed at her. What if Lydia wasn't just a thief, but part of something bigger? Something that could swallow them both whole. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Then we'll expose them. All of them." Hours later, when they finally cracked the veil around Harper Consulting, Evelyn felt her stomach twist again. The company was registered under a shell corporation in Nevada, then funneled through another in Delaware. But the name on the paperwork was unmistakable. Lydia Hartman. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was fact. Aiden exhaled sharply, closing his laptop with a snap. "She's been playing us for years. And she's good. But not good enough." Evelyn straightened in her chair, fire flickering in her chest. "We bring her down," she said. Aiden nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. "But carefully. She's smart, and she'll see us coming if we make a wrong move. We can't just accuse her. We need proof that sticks, something undeniable." Evelyn's gaze hardened as she looked out the coffee shop window, where the world bustled on in blissful ignorance. "Then we'll get it. Whatever it takes." And for the first time in years, she and her son shared not just a mission, but a purpose. United not by blood alone, but by betrayal, by fire, and by the desperate need for justice. Evelyn sat at her dining table, the same polished oak surface where years of family dinners had been shared, but tonight it served as a war room. She and Aiden leaned over maps of the foundation's offices, stacks of documents, and a burner phone Aiden had purchased that afternoon. The weight of what they were doing wasn't lost on her. For a woman who had once prided herself on kindness and trust, She now found herself plotting like a detective in a crime drama. Aiden's voice was steady, though his eyes burned with restrained fury. We can't just hand this to the police yet. If Lydia senses even the smallest threat, she'll disappear. And with the money. Evelyn nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of a ledger. So we play along. We let her think she's still in control. Aiden leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. And then we set her up to hang herself. Evelyn's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally taking back her power. The plan was simple on paper but dangerous in execution. Aiden had already reached out to an old friend from college, Marcus, a tech genius with a knack for digital forensics who owed him a favor. Marcus had agreed to plant surveillance software on Lydia's computer, cloaked so deeply in the Foundation system she'd never detect it. Once it's in, Aiden explained, we'll see everything, emails, transactions, even drafts she doesn't send. If she's planning her next move, we'll know before she makes it. Evelyn listened, her heart pounding harder with every detail. It was thrilling, but the risk was immense. If Lydia caught even a whiff of suspicion, she could erase years of data, vanish with millions, and leave them scrambling in the ruins. Still, Evelyn forced her voice steady. We'll do it. But we have to be careful how we act around her. We can't let her suspect for even a moment that we know. The thought of facing Lydia tomorrow, smiling as though nothing had changed, made Evelyn's stomach churn, but it was necessary. 2 days later, Evelyn walked into the Foundation office with the calm poise of a woman who had forgiven the world. Lydia greeted her with the same warm smile as always, papers neatly stacked in her arms. Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker. I've prepared the quarterly updates for you to review. Evelyn returned the smile, her voice measured, even affectionate. Thank you, Lydia. You always keep us so organized. The words tasted bitter, but Evelyn delivered them flawlessly. She sat through the meeting, nodding at charts and figures, all while knowing each line was laced with lies. Across the room, Aiden played his part too. He asked Lydia polite, almost deferential questions, masking his contempt under a veneer of casual interest. When Lydia excused herself to fetch another file, Evelyn and Aiden exchanged a brief glance, one that said everything. The trap was already closing, and Lydia hadn't sensed a thing. That night, Marcus sent them the first packet of data. Aiden projected it on Evelyn's living room wall, lines of code unraveling into plain English. Look at this, he muttered, scrolling through an email draft Lydia hadn't sent yet. Evelyn leaned forward, reading each word as if they were drops of poison. Funds from Harper Consulting will be redirected through Cayman accounts. Once cleared, I'll sever ties with the Foundation permanently. By then, the Whitakers won't know what hit them. Evelyn's hands shook. This wasn't just theft. This was annihilation. Lydia hadn't been planning to stop. She intended to drain them dry and disappear forever. Aiden's voice was iron. She's planning her escape. But this means we still have time to stop her. Evelyn exhaled slowly, fighting the tears threatening to fall. The betrayal was sharper now, more vicious, but it also gave her clarity. Then we move fast. We give her just enough rope to believe she's safe, and then we tighten it around her. Over the next week, Evelyn became an actress. She attended board meetings, shared coffee breaks with Lydia, and even laughed at her small talk, all while suppressing the urge to scream. Each evening, she and Aiden pored over Lydia's digital footprint with Marcus, watching in real time as their betrayer built her empire of lies. Evelyn marveled at how meticulous Lydia was. She never used the same route twice, never left a transaction unshielded, never trusted the same bank account for too long. She's brilliant, Aiden admitted one night, his voice tinged with reluctant respect. Evelyn glanced at him sharply. She's a thief, she corrected coldly. And brilliance used for betrayal is nothing but rot. Aiden said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Evelyn could see the toll it was taking on him too. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about the cracks Lydia had driven into their family. They were stitching themselves back together, but every stitch hurt. The final piece of the trap came together on a Thursday evening. Aiden and Marcus had forged a false trail, a fabricated final transfer, scheduled for the Foundation's largest grant. To Lydia, it would look like the perfect opportunity. $10 million, ready to be siphoned with one keystroke. What she wouldn't know was that the account she'd be redirecting it to was controlled by Marcus, monitored by law enforcement, and tracked from every angle. Evelyn sat at her kitchen counter that night, staring at the printed plan. Her fingers traced the bold red circle around Lydia's name. "Tomorrow," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "Tomorrow she makes her move." Aiden stood beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. For the first time since this war began, Evelyn felt the faintest glimmer of peace. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were hunters. And Lydia was about to walk into their jaws. Evelyn barely slept the night before. Dawn crept through the blinds, washing her room in pale gold, but her thoughts were darker than ever. She sat at her vanity, brushing her silver hair, her reflection reminding her of both fragility and steel. Today would decide everything. Lydia believed she had mastered the game, believed Evelyn too naive, too trusting to see the walls closing in. But Evelyn was no longer the woman who signed papers blindly or laughed at Lydia's polished jokes. She was sharpened now, honed by betrayal and pain, ready to reclaim what was hers. Aiden entered quietly, adjusting his tie, his face tight with focus. "She'll try to look calm," he said, his voice gravelly with the weight of sleepless nights. "But the second she realizes what we've done, the mask will crack." Evelyn met his eyes in the mirror and whispered, "Then let's be the ones holding the mirror." Together, they left the house, heading straight into battle. The Foundation's boardroom was polished to perfection, the long mahogany table gleaming beneath the chandelier. Lydia arrived first, impeccably dressed in a slate-gray suit, her posture radiating confidence. She carried her leather folder like a shield, her smile effortlessly charming. "Good morning, Mrs. Whittaker." "Aiden. I trust you've both reviewed the grant documents." Evelyn nodded, her voice soft, almost weary. "Yes, Lydia. I've looked them over." Aiden slid a stack of papers across the table, his movements deliberate, as though they were performing in a play. Lydia glanced at the documents, her eyes flickering with practiced efficiency. She didn't notice the faint red seal at the corner, the silent mark of Marcus's forgery. Evelyn watched carefully, her pulse drumming in her ears. This was it. Lydia believed she was one step away from vanishing with everything Evelyn had built. The room felt suffocating with the weight of deception, yet Evelyn kept her face unreadable. She thought of her husband, of the legacy Lydia had tried to burn, and steadied herself for the strike. Minutes later, the moment unfolded like clockwork. Lydia's fingers glided over her laptop, the fake transfer file glowing on the screen. She hesitated only long enough to glance at Evelyn and Aiden, her lips curving into what might have been a victory smile. "With your approval, Mrs. Whittaker, the funds will be redirected today," she said smoothly. Evelyn nodded, her eyes deceptively calm. "Proceed." Lydia tapped the keys, and in that instant, the silent trap snapped shut. Marcus's system intercepted the transfer, freezing the account, and within seconds federal agents monitoring the sting received their alert. Lydia leaned back, triumphant, unaware that her every keystroke had sealed her downfall. Aiden's phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus's single-word text. "Done." Evelyn folded her hands, her voice like ice. "Tell me, Lydia, does it ever trouble you, stealing from people who trusted you?" The younger woman blinked, her smile faltering for the first time. I don't know what you mean." Evelyn leaned forward, her tone razor-sharp. "Don't insult me. We know everything." The mask cracked instantly. Lydia's pupils dilated, her breath quickened, and the color drained from her face. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, her polished composure unraveling. "You don't have proof." Aiden slammed a thick folder onto the table, paper spilling across the polished surface. Printouts of emails, wire transfers, draft messages Marcus had uncovered. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Lydia's hand trembled as she tried to gather the papers, her voice rising in panic. "This is fabricated. This is a setup." Evelyn's voice cut through her like a blade. "No. Lydia. This is justice." The room fell silent except for Lydia's ragged breathing. Tears welled in her eyes, though Evelyn couldn't tell if they were real or just another performance. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn saw the young woman she had once trusted, the girl she thought of almost as family. But then she remembered the email, the plan to leave them ruined, and her sympathy turned to ash. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. 2 men in suits entered the boardroom, badges flashing under the chandelier's light. Lydia's chair screeched against the floor as she stumbled to her feet. "You can't do this." I gave everything to this foundation," she screamed, her voice breaking into hysteria. Evelyn rose slowly, her gaze steady, her tone calm, almost eerily so. "You took everything, Lydia. You took my trust. My family's name. You would have left us with nothing." The agent stepped forward, reciting her rights, their voices steady against her protests. Lydia's eyes darted wildly to Evelyn, then to Aiden, desperation twisting her features. "Please, please don't let them take me," she begged. Evelyn's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain still. She had begged once too, when Lydia had quietly pushed her aside, when her son had turned his back on her. She would not beg anymore. Watching Lydia's wrists bound in silver cuffs, Evelyn felt not triumph, but release. As the agents led Lydia away, her voice echoed down the hallway. Pleas, accusations, the frantic cries of a woman whose empire had crumbled. Evelyn stood rooted to the floor, her body trembling, her breath uneven. Aiden stepped beside her, his hand lightly brushing her arm. "It's over," he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered, her eyes following the empty doorway. "This is just the beginning." She thought of the damage Lydia had done, the trust broken, the scars left behind. But for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the faint spark of control returning to her life. She turned to Aiden, her voice steadier now. "We rebuild. On our terms this time. Stronger." Aiden nodded, his eyes filled with pride and fierce loyalty. Evelyn exhaled deeply, her shoulders finally releasing the weight she had carried for so long. The storm had broken, and she was still standing. Evelyn thought the silence after Lydia's arrest would bring peace, but instead, it felt like the eerie calm after a hurricane. The house was quiet, too quiet, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway amplifying the emptiness around her. She spent mornings tending her garden, evenings rereading old letters from her late husband, but even as she stitched together pieces of her life, one wound still bled, her son. Months had passed since the inheritance that had severed their bond. He had walked away with $12 million and a heart cold enough to leave her behind. Yet as she poured herself tea one afternoon, the phone rang. A number she hadn't seen in months. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the receiver. The voice on the other end was shaky, desperate. "Mom, I need your help. Please." For a moment, Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the irony wash over her like bitter medicine. The boy who cut her off was crawling back. When Aiden arrived later that day, Evelyn told him about the call. He leaned against the mantel, his jaw tightening, his eyes filled with cautious suspicion. "He left you, Evelyn. He chose greed over blood. Don't let him twist you again." But Evelyn's heart was a battlefield. She remembered the child who once ran barefoot through the garden, the boy who brought her dandelions as if they were roses. Yet she also remembered the man who turned his back on her, waving money like a sword. Hours later, she drove across town to meet him at a downtown cafe. He looked different, disheveled, exhausted, his eyes ringed with sleepless nights. The confidence of wealth was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man cornered. He slid a stack of papers toward her across the table. "I can't access the rest of the estate funds without your signature," he muttered. Evelyn stared at the papers, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. She had the power now, and he knew it. "What happened to your millions?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm, almost too calm. Her son shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. "Bad investments. Lydia. She promised returns, but it was all fake. I didn't know she was lying to me too." His voice cracked on the last word, shame coating every syllable. Evelyn felt a flash of satisfaction. Justice had reached him too. But then came the sting. He hadn't just lost money, he had lost himself. She leaned closer, her gaze unflinching. "You shut me out when I needed you most. You left me with nothing but silence. And now you want me to save you." His lips trembled, his eyes brimming with tears. "I was wrong, Mom. I see it now. I see what I did to you. Please. I'm begging you." The cafe hummed with quiet conversations around them, but Evelyn's world narrowed to this moment. The boy she raised, the man who broke her, asking for her lifeline. The power sat in her hands like a living thing. A single signature could restore his fortune, or deny him everything. Evelyn's chest tightened as she imagined her late husband standing behind her, whispering wisdom. "Forgive. or teach him the consequence of betrayal. She remembered nights alone, crying into her pillow when her son shut her out. She remembered his laughter as he flaunted his wealth, dismissing her warnings about Lydia. And yet, she also remembered his first steps, his first word, the way his small hand once clung to hers. Tears burned her eyes, but her voice was steady. "If I sign, it won't be for you. It will be for the child I raised, the boy who loved me, not the man who abandoned me." He nodded frantically, seizing the glimmer of hope. "Yes, Mom. Please. I'll do better. I swear." Evelyn hesitated, the pen hovering above the page. The choice was hers alone. Mercy or retribution. At last, Evelyn placed the pen down. But instead of signing, she slid the papers back across the table. Her son's face drained of color, his hope shattering like glass. "I can't," she whispered, her voice laced with sorrow but also steel. "You need to understand that money can't buy back trust. It can't erase betrayal. And it can't replace family." His eyes widened, anger and grief warring inside him. "So you'll let me lose everything?" he choked out. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "You've already lost what matters most. Maybe when you learn to value love over wealth, you'll find your way back. But not like this. Not with signatures and papers. You'll have to earn it." She stood, leaving him staring at the unsigned documents, his hands trembling, his world collapsing. Walking out of that cafe, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in years: liberation. She didn't just refuse him. She reclaimed herself. Evelyn returned home that night, her heart heavy yet strangely light. She knew she had made the harder choice, but also the truer one. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to be bought with desperation. It was a bridge to be built with time and trust. She stepped into her garden, the stars shimmering above, and whispered to her late husband, "I did it. I chose us. I chose me." For the first time in decades, she felt untethered, as if the chains of betrayal had finally broken. And though her son's future now rested in his own hands, Evelyn's was clear. She would live not as a victim, but as a survivor, stronger and freer than ever before.